Hello everyone, welcome to Focus's new video series partnering with Jimmy Michell of Love Good about letting beauty speak and using beauty in our lives to evangelize the culture. I'm here with Jimmy right now. Jimmy, do you want to explain who you are?
Trevor, great to be with you. Obviously a huge fan of Focus. I've been involved since I think my senior year of college, which I'm a little ashamed to admit was 13 years ago. And it was really amazing actually watching this journey of Focus unfold during my 10, 12 years in Nashville, where it's had a huge presence at Vanderbilt as well as Belmont. And so, yeah, tonight we have an opportunity to kind of dive into what's very normal back in Nashville, where I lived most of the last 15 years, which is a conversation about beauty, the role that beauty plays in the evangelization of culture. And I think we could probably all recognize that the culture is kind of falling apart right now. So much of my adult life, my professional life, has been dedicated to supporting artists, coming alongside musicians and singer-songwriters and really empowering them to bring beauty to the forefront of their craft and then to allow that beauty to evangelize the world around them. And that's been a huge part of my life personally. But over the last 7, 8, 10 years, it's become a huge part of my professional life as well.
Yeah, and beauty is everywhere. It's a major part of our lives. And I'm so excited for us to dive into this 3-part video series to where we really show not only that the culture is just not really doing its job at all of showing who the author of all these beautiful things are, but I'm so excited for you to walk us through how we can practically use beauty the way that it's properly supposed to be to lead us to God. So for this first video, we're going to be talking about post-Christian culture. Could you just open us up and just give us your gentle thoughts, what you think about post-Christian culture?
I'll be as gentle as I can. I mean, it's very easy to get whimsical and nostalgic and to think, if we were just living in the heights of the Middle Ages, where every French and Italian village had a beautiful Catholic steeple and the church was the heartbeat of culture. And perhaps we might even say, imagine what it was like to live in the early centuries of the church, right as Christianity was first legalized under Constantine, right as the beginning of the Western monastic tradition was unfolding. I think it's easy to get a bit whimsical and to forget that every age, every era has had its issues, and I think the opportunity before us is to understand the particular issues of our time, but to also not lose our head over it. I think it's actually Chesterton who talks very consistently about not exaggerating the novelty of our age, of our era, the disaster and crisis and unrest that we might experience, especially in these COVID times. It's very easy to despair and to lose hope. So when we talk about post-Christian culture, we are definitely talking about the last 300 to 500 years, the beginning of modern philosophy, which, began with Rene Descartes and has kind of led to a increasingly atheistic, secular society where God is not at the center of our lives, of our families, of our communities, even our legal system. And so it's interesting right now because I think in America, we're seeing some worlds collide right now. And we're seeing a fight for life in the womb. We're seeing a fight for religious freedom. And I think the temptation is perhaps to politicize all of that and to think that the world is going to come to an end if we don't elect a certain candidate for president of the United States or get a certain Supreme Court justice nominated and confirmed, and yet even in a political year, a chaotic and politically tense year, I think it's important to recognize we're just very far from Christ being the integrating principle of American culture or Western culture, and to not despair, to recognize the reality and to even diagnose kind of the symptoms of that reality, but to also not put our head in the sand and to be nostalgic or optimistic in a way that doesn't lead to real change and renewal.
Yeah, that's good. It sounds like you're taking a very balanced approach with things. Like that both the church and society have been imperfect, both today and all the past centuries, in different ways. So what you're saying is, yes, there are imperfect things both in culture and in the church, but we're talking about the culture right now. And all we have to do is just keep a level head about it and actually just look at it for what it is, what specifically is happening here in our modern times, so that we can best address it for now, rather than just either despairing and doing nothing about it, or thinking there's no problem and doing nothing about it.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's what Pope Benedict XVI calls sort of a practical atheism. That's what we have on our hands. It's not that there's very many people who would be vowed atheists, right? But there's a lot who live, practically speaking, as if God doesn't exist. And I think that's most at the heart of what I mean by a post-Christian culture. And, we're going to dive into it, but the three most visible and sort of alarming traits or symptoms of that post-Christian culture, I think, are noise, relativism, and isolation. What do you think, Trevor? Should we go ahead and dive into them?
Let's dive in. Let's start with noise.
Yeah. So obviously there's a really popular book came out, I think about a year and a half ago now, by Cardinal Seurat, this great African cardinal, and it's called The Power of Silence Against the Dictatorship of Noise. Ever since reading that book, I've recognized the need in my own life for silence. But I'd say for years now, I've been thinking in a very similar way about my need for beauty, which kind of pushes back against that noise. So just to throw out some, alarming statistics, this is things that we've probably heard or certainly in some way come to recognize in our own lives. The noise is pervasive, so pervasive, right? So at the current moment, Americans check their phones once every 12 minutes, right? We actually scroll the length, the height of Mount Everest and back every single year with our thumbs on our devices. I think the current stat is there's about 500,000 new Facebook users every single day. I don't know where they're coming from anymore. I'm pretty sure our grandparents' generation is all locked up on Facebook now, but apparently there's still new accounts opening every day. Something like 95 million Instagram photos every single day, 500 million tweets, right? So the noise is everywhere. Netflix, I don't even know what these stats are since quarantine began, like back in March and April. But long before we were all stuck in our homes and even working behind our screens 8 hours a day, most of us were Netflixing 568 hours a year. That's an average of an hour and a half a day. Over a billion hours of video consumed on YouTube every day across the world. So it's not that the media is the problem. Our attachment to the media, any enslavement that we might have, right, because of the media, that's the problem. And what it reduces is any opportunity to encounter God through silence and through beauty. So the noise really is everywhere. I think we can all feel it. In my own life, I've started sleeping, 2 rooms away from where my phone is plugged in because I just can't handle it. I'm not disciplined enough, and it destroys my peace early in the morning and late at night. I found that actually most technology after 8 or 9 o'clock at night, it doesn't do much good for me. It's better to make a phone call, maybe, but ideally to read a book, to kind of settle into the evening with some authentic leisure, rather than just consume more of the noise around me.
The companies that make these apps and design the phones, they've looked at all the brain science that they need to build these habits and make these as addicting as possible. But I'm just curious real quick, before we move on to relativism, why do you think people are so attached to the noise these days? What are they trying to fill there? Like, why it seems to just pervade across whether you're Christian, atheist, non-religious, just seems to get everyone. Like, why do you think that is?
I think certainly I can speak for myself when I say that if I don't have noise, then I have to actually look within and reckon with myself. And I often don't like what I see when I look inside, I think most of us are afraid of silence because we hate ourselves. I mean, that's a bit of a dramatic way of saying it. But I find it increasingly true that when I'm afraid of silence, it's because there's something I need to deal with, sort of at the level of my psyche or my soul. So I think the noise is in a sense, a way of anesthetizing, right? that angst, that ache, that existential ache even. And it sort of fills my life with some sense of busyness that I might even confuse with productivity sometimes. And then I don't really have to deal with the big questions, you know?
Right, right. And so let's go ahead and move on to relativism here. What is relativism? Can you define that for the viewers?
Oh, great question. You want like a real good, strict definition. It's funny. I mean, it's this sort of mentality, right? That everybody has their own truth. And when you really look at the times that we're living in, I think moral relativism is obvious. And we're all supposed to be tolerant, but only to a point. Like I'll never forget what it was like to be at Vanderbilt when the administration kicked off pretty much every solidly Christian student group on campus because they were, in a sense, taking their non-discrimination policy to its logical conclusion. What they saw as their logical conclusion, and they basically declared all Christians bigots. Pretty interesting, you know. That's a relativism kind of gone awry. And frankly, a relativism with a lot of contradictions. I think that's what's interesting. The world that we're living in right now, they kind of want to say, well, you have your truth and I have mine, and let's just agree to disagree. But we're almost in like a post-relativism where it's like you either see like people of deep faith and deep conviction and real virtue, or you kind of see this growing ideology. You know, you certainly see it on the political side of things, but even culturally speaking, we don't want to believe that there is an objective truth that would then imply or even lead to our lives being lived in an objectively good way, right? So that relativism, if it's real, you know, if we really believe that there's no truth, then we can live however we want to live. It reminds me of Bishop Fulton Sheen. He said that there's no real atheist out there, right? Most people are atheists because they want their lifestyle to inform their philosophy, not their philosophy to inform their lifestyle. And if your philosophy is relativism, you can live however the hell you want. You know, it's a very convenient creed, you know?
Right, and I think both with relativism and noise that we earlier talked about, I feel like there are just some good intentions there with both of them, right? So with noise, I feel like when I'm just filling up my space with like a podcast or music just to fill the space, and so it's not quiet and I don't have to think about deep, uncomfortable things that are cropping up, right? There's a good that I'm going after when I fill up with noise. I'm just trying to like address something, but it's not the greatest good. And because I'm settling for this good, I'm missing out on the great. I'm missing out on the perfect and the fullness of truth. And that's what I believe with these people, especially with moral relativists, relativists of the truth. They're trying to make sure that we're not stepping on people's toes, making sure that no one is offended. And it seems like a good intention, a good motivation, but if you don't commit to anything, then it's actually just one of the worst things you can do that you mentioned. It's not fulfilling, and it's philosophically just going to break down pretty quick.
That's right. Yeah, Chesterton puts it like this. He says that there's an infinity of angles by which one falls, you know, but only one angle by which one stands. And, you know, that's the objective truth, you know, that we need for our souls to stand upright. And yet, even in my own life, I can remember being in high school and opening up certain pages of our catechism and convincing myself that certain things weren't serious sins because, well, I was enjoying them too much, right. You know? It wasn't until I was in college. It was, in large part, a chaplain that came in and brought focused missionaries to campus. And suddenly I realized, well, there's real freedom in accepting objective truth and then striving for a life of virtue that's rooted in that objective truth versus values that our culture holds up that can be rooted, frankly, in whatever you want. So I think virtue is sort of the answer here when you've got relativism rampant as it is.
Yeah, and I think something we can all agree to as well is that when we go for those higher things, the more virtuous things, it often is not comfortable. It often hurts a lot. It often involves a lot of suffering. I mean, that's really clear when you're like working out, trying to gain muscle, right? Trying to become more healthy, trying to eat better. You do have to make sacrifices in order to get a greater good. And that's a very objective one that you can see with your eyes. But when it comes to morality, when it comes to truth, it's still true. You need to make those sacrifices to go for the greatest good possible. You can't just settle because it's comfortable. I mean, comfort is not what we're going after here. And
that's right.
Let's move on to this final topic, isolation. That's just your last descriptor of culture. Can you go into that a little bit?
It's funny. That's a word that I've been thinking about a lot over the last few years. It became incredibly relevant once COVID-19 hit and everybody was truly physically isolated. And I think probably more emotionally and spiritually isolated than ever before. So, some of the symptoms or some of the consequences, I should say, of this isolation is, things like porn, which, right now is a $97 billion industry. You can also see isolation within the family. We take for granted that 50% of marriages end in divorce in America, but we probably forget that's the third highest divorce rate in the world. We're affluent. We are in many ways comfortable. We have everything going for us in this country, and yet there's a deep misery because of the isolation many people feel within their own homes. This is kind of crazy. I think a lot of the isolation that is around us, that we feel deep inside, it has led to this anxiety epidemic. Just in the last year, 40% of Americans are saying that they are struggling with anxiety more than they were a year ago. I mean, 24%, I think, in the last 20 years. This is the last 20 years of young adults. Their most common way of dying prematurely is now suicide. It used to be drug overdoses. It used to be, even for teenagers, it used to be like car accidents. So that, reality of divorce, suicide, anxiety, pornography addiction, all of that is pointing to this deep isolation that we all feel. And it's a longing for communion. It's a longing for ultimately God himself, right? And there's a great quote, I think, from Cardinal Seurat. This is not from The Power of Silence, but a book he more recently wrote called The Day is Far Spent. He said that we've entered into a civilization of the chaos of desires. And the deeper we sink into the chaos, the more obvious it becomes that when the primitive pleasures dry up, man prefers to have done with life. He prefers nothingness. So in light of noise, relativism, isolation, how do we climb out of the despair? How do we climb out of the darkness? And I think this is what we're going to talk about next. Beauty is the remedy. Beauty is what makes sacrifice sweet. Beauty is what makes love desirable. And I think beauty is where even our virtue can start to play itself out, even on the level of our passions, which need purification, which need proper ordering. And again, beauty is, I would say, the one transcendental in our times that knows no enemy. So again, it's just a very powerful way to reclaim what it means to be human, first of all, but then to go and evangelize this post-Christian culture we're living in.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to dive into that in our next video, part 2, with how beauty is the answer to these things. But I'm just so glad that we're able to have a balanced approach to viewing where our culture is at, because you're naming all these stats, and I feel like you didn't even need to name the stats for us to agree with these facts, that the proof is in the pudding. With what culture is putting on us, it's just leading to worse and worse outcomes. It's getting worse, and it's not satisfying. And in a lot of these things, a lot of people are trying to go after God. Their soul is yearning for something, but it's just something, ends up being something less. Culture is just offering something empty. And so I'm so excited for our next video, Jimmy, to go into beauty and how this is the solution.
Amazing, Trevor. Myself included, I'm very excited. And we're just sort of hitting the surface here. I think it's easy at this point to sort of lose hope, but this is exactly the turning point. Once we, like any 12 steps program, we acknowledge the problem. We recognize the fact that things are not as they should be. They're also not as they could be. And look forward to continuing the conversation and begin to really problem solve this with the help of beauty and the great popes and saints who have gone before us, who have really proposed beauty as a remedy as well.
And before we finish, what's a good resource that you can direct people that this is already striking their hearts, a place where they can go deeper?
Yes. So letbeautyspeak.com is the only place right now where you can find a 12-week live stream retreat series that we did actually at the very beginning of quarantine back in March, April of 2020, when the world was sort of turning in on itself and losing its mind, with plenty of justification. This is a journey into not only a deeper diagnosis of the culture, but a way of bringing beauty to the forefront of our lives in such a way that we can be those agents of renewal, those agents of transformation out there. So letbeautyspeak.com, simple way to type in your name and your email address and to really begin thinking more personally about the role beauty can play in our own work of evangelization.
That sounds great. Everyone, letbeautyspeak.com. If this is interesting to you, if this is striking you, this is so important in today's culture. And really, we need it ourselves, and those around us need it. So we'll see you in the next video where we talk about beauty.